Welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. My name is Conrad Weaver. I'm so glad you're here today. Hey, before we jump into our episode and the conversation I had with my guest, I want to tell you about something that we launched last week on Friday. You know, every agency has leaders. You have leaders within your department. But is that leadership in a healthy place? I'm not talking about necessarily the individuals, which, yeah, that matters, but overall, is your agency leadership in a healthy place? How healthy is your leadership culture? How healthy is it really? Well, we've developed a 10-minute, really 5 to 10-minute questionnaire assessment that you can get a score, and it's kind of like taking the temperature of your agency leadership. And we're going to invite you to take it for absolutely free. It's available right now. If you go to firstresponderwellness.co/assessment, firstresponderwellness.co/assessment, you can take the 10-minute, really it's probably only 5 minutes, assessment for absolutely free. Take it and you'll get a score back in your email that will give you a score and a little bit of a snapshot of what your overall agency health looks like. So I encourage you to do that. Go to our website right now. I'll put a link in the show notes below that you can access it and take the leadership assessment. And we provided an email that you'll get back automatically that will give you some helpful tips as to maybe what to do next, depending on your score. So take the assessment today and see what the temperature is of your leadership culture within your agency, within your organization. So it's available right now. firstresponderwellness.co/assessment. firstresponderwellness.co/assessment. Hey, today's conversation takes us in an area that, to be frank, I'm not really comfortable with talking about. But it's an area of a modality of healing that some people are using that works, and it worked for my guest today. So my guest today is Kemmi Sadler. Kemmi is a retired diplomatic security officer where she spent her career protecting U.S. embassies and investigating major crimes and working in high-threat environments overseas. And she's worked in some of the most high-stress and high-threat environments that exist in the world, including Iraq, during the conflicts there. She does a deep dive into kind of how that environment impacted her and even how it impacted her in ways that she wasn't aware of until she discovered a modality that is unconventional. And this is where my uncomfortableness comes in, where she discovered ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is a psychedelic that is taken, and in many places in the U.S. it's not legal, but it has been legalized in some areas of the country and for specific ways of taking it. And so she was able to get into this and use ayahuasca which helped her reveal things in her mind and in her life that she wasn't even aware of that she was carrying. And she'll talk about that. She'll talk about that healing that took place in her life. So take a listen to this conversation and we'll see where it goes, and I'll wrap up at the end. Here's my conversation with Kemmi Sadler. Well, Kemmi, welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. It's so good to connect and have you on the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
So we connected a couple of weeks ago on LinkedIn, and looking at your bio, you have an interesting background in the first responder space, a little different than a lot of boots on the ground first responders here in the U.S. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I started in local law enforcement. Actually, I started before that in corrections in Anchorage, Alaska, in a halfway house, like a work release halfway house for a couple of years. And then I moved to Florida and became a 911 dispatcher with the St. Augustine Police Department while I put myself through the police academy. So I worked full-time 911 and full-time police academy for about 6 months. I barely survived that 6 months. I was with St. Augustine Police Department from 97 to 2001. My last day with that department was September 10th. And on 9/11, I was putting all of my stuff in a storage unit to take a contract position with Department of Defense in Kuwait.
Wow.
And as that day started to unfold, I got a number of phone calls, and one of them was from the chief of police. And he said, "Hey, do you want your job back, or are you still going to the Middle East?" I was like, "Well, I signed a contract. I feel like, to back out at this point would be unpatriotic." So I went to Kuwait for about 2 years, and I learned about the Diplomatic Security Service, which is the law enforcement arm of the U.S. State Department, while I was in Kuwait. And it just so happened that when I found out about DSS, the announcement for the job was open, and I applied for it. I was fortunate to get a conditional offer of employment, so I came back to the United States. I started with DS in January of 2004, and I retired in April of 2024.
So a pretty long career there in the that branch of that department. So what does that involve as far as security for diplomatic? Do you guys provide security for for embassies, things like that?
Yeah, exactly. So a couple of different roles. On the investigative side of the house, DS is responsible for passport and visa fraud investigations.
Okay.
And we do a lot of work with other agencies like DHS, human trafficking investigations, organized crime, fugitives. We track down a lot of fugitives that end up overseas. We do a lot of dignitary protection, so similar to the Secret Service in that regard. We have a full-time detail on the U.S. Secretary of State, and any visiting foreign dignitaries that come to the United States that the Secret Service doesn't pick up, who aren't heads of states, DS picks up those individuals. So a lot of protection work. And then we have overall responsibility for the safety and security of our U.S. embassies and personnel overseas.
Mm-hmm. So how does that job affect you? I know you said you spent some time, in 911 and in law enforcement here in the States. How is that job different than what a diplomatic security job?
There's some similarities, but quite a bit different. The operating environment is different, and the operating environment changes from one position to the next. So the DS is very similar to the military in the regard that the assignments are temporary, and it depends on the threat level in the location determines the length of the tour. So a tour in Iraq or Afghanistan is 1 year, and then a tour in somewhere in Europe is 3 years.
So the stress level is different there, and
the responsibilities of the job changed dramatically from one to another. A year in Iraq is very reactive, just every day reacting to the crisis of the day and whatever is going on. Whereas a tour I never served in Europe. All my tours were in places where we had to be fairly reactive. But as the threat level goes down, the job becomes more normal, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So tell me about your journey, your personal journey, and when it comes to your mental health, your wellness. How did this kind of work? And I can imagine being under, like, in a place like Iraq, where you were there during kind of the conflict time when the U.S. was there. How does that affect your mental health when you're under that kind of pressure? I know you guys had incoming all the time. You had to, duck and cover and do all that kind of stuff. How does that affect you?
Yeah, I was in Iraq from August 2006 to August 2007, when the embassy was actually still in Saddam's palace before we had an actual building of our own there. And there was a lot of indirect fire during the year I was there, and explosions, vehicles in town. It's one of those things, though, that I think until you have the benefit of hindsight, you don't recognize it. You're just going on about your day, getting the job done. And even I remember after that tour, just kind of laughing, the duck and cover would go off and just, you get to a point where you just ignore it because it goes off all the time. And sometimes it's a false alarm. And, we would have indirect fire hit the compound, and we would gear up and take our med kits and go out to see if anybody was hurt or there was anything that needed to be addressed. And often there would be a second volley, timed probably to
kind of like a double tap type of thing.
Yeah. And initially we'd go out anyway. And you just kind of become almost numb to it. But I started to experience, I think the first thing, but I didn't recognize it at the time, was I started to have a really debilitating pain in my ear. And it would happen every afternoon. I would just get this, felt like someone was sticking an ice pick in my ear. I later learned that it was TMJ, and it's because I was clenching my teeth at night.
Wow.
And so in the afternoon is when that, I guess, buildup of pressure started to impact me. So I just started to drink, alcohol.
Thinking that's gonna solve that, and
alcohol would take the edge off of the pain. So that was the first way that it showed up, but I didn't connect those dots at the time that was my body's reaction to stress. I was just literally clenching in my sleep at night.
I think that can be true for a lot of any first responder here. They're going through all the stuff that they go through and going to scenes and calls and all the stuff. And maybe they're not sleeping at night, and they're not correlating the two things, that their daytime or shift work that they're doing is affecting their sleep or even their interactions at home.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what did that look like for you? Where did that take you? If that makes sense.
Well, I dealt with that particular issue for a number of years. I ended up doing orthodontics to actually change the way that my teeth hit at night. And that eventually gave me some relief, but the stress started to show up, in other ways, as you just said, like in relationships, and, just, it builds up and it starts to change your character, but not necessarily in ways that you recognize, because I think it happens so slowly over time. And when I started to think about retiring, it's so hard to let go of that part of yourself that, it's part of your identity, and how do you, and I ended up finding my way, long story short, I ended up finding my way to psychedelics. But not necessarily for that reason. It just coincided with the time. So I lost two people who were close to me. And I knew I had some unresolved grief that I needed to process. My father, who passed away in 2014, while I was in El Salvador. I was home when he passed away, but I was on a 3-year assignment in El Salvador at the time. And there was a woman that worked for me in Iraq in 2006, who she and her husband were kidnapped in town. He was held for ransom. She ended up going to pay a ransom, was kidnapped, and they were both killed.
Wow. And
I had a lot of guilt surrounding that. I felt
were these Iraqis or were they Americans?
They were an Iraqi couple. They were an older couple. They could have retired and moved out of the country. But they believed in Iraq. They believed that it could return to the place they remembered when they were young, when it was a very progressive, educated country, and they wanted that back, and they wanted to be part of that. And so they stayed, and they were working for the embassy. And unfortunately they were both killed. And I carried a lot of guilt because I felt like I should have been able to prevent her from, I knew I wasn't going to stop her from going, but, and I'm not at liberty to go into detail of what happened,
Sure.
the specifics of it, but suffice it to say, I felt like I should have been able to do more. And I had a lot of guilt with that. And I knew, this was now when I retired was, it happened in 2007. I retired in 2024. And so I knew it was something that weighed on me. And about probably 2 years before I retired, I was listening to a podcast and I heard the podcaster talking about ayahuasca. It was Joe Rogan and Graham Hancock were discussing ayahuasca, and I'd never heard of it before. And the way that they were discussing it with such reverence just piqued my curiosity. And so I started to investigate it and dig into the research on it and just wanting to know more about, what this was. And I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something I was meant to experience. And so I ended up finding my way to a ceremony after I retired. And the surprising thing through that journey was I found relief from those two losses, but I also found healing from so many things that I didn't realize I needed to heal from. And a lot of that was stuff that had built up over the course of my career in just ways that I had really become, I don't know, hardened. I just had this tough exterior, and so much tied to that identity that it made it possible for all of that to kind of melt away, and for me really just kind of, I would say reinvent myself, but honestly, I feel like I got myself back. I feel like I was able to return to who I was before all of that scar tissue built up over, 26 years. So it wasn't something I ever anticipated that I would be, to use my mother's words, involved with. But here I am.
I want to learn more about that and how that impacted you, but I want to go back a little bit. Was there anything in place in the service that you work for? Was there anything in place that helped the folks that in that agency kind of realize that, hey, this stuff's going to affect you? Was there any kind of teaching on that or training on that?
There is a little bit. DS has had a peer support group for a number of years. I was part of that group. Just a group of agents who volunteer to go through a training and to be on a list of agents who you can call if you're going through something, to be there for you. And after a tour in Iraq or Afghanistan or another war zone, there is a mandatory training that you had to go through that talked about resilience and stress and what to look for. And, honestly, at least when I was a younger agent, after that tour in 2007, and did we even have it then? I think we did. I think I think it was something that you had to do.
But there wasn't anything necessarily ahead of time to kind of say, hey, this is going to happen. This could happen.
Not that I recall. No.
I wonder if that's something that they could implement now, or maybe they are, because there's been a lot more of awareness about all this stuff.
Yeah.
And just like a lot of police departments, fire departments, I know like in Cal Fire, in their academy, they do a whole course on wellness and how to breathe and doing yoga and all the things to prepare you for the stuff that they're, these young people, what they're going to face. And so I think it would be really important for someone like that, especially if you're going into a hostile environment, to be able to have that kind of training ahead of time. And
Right.
what my friend Phil Bequee says, he calls it presiliency, having that resiliency beforehand.
Right.
So yeah.
I do think the culture is changing. I am hopeful that it's becoming something that's more readily talked about. The year before I retired, I had the opportunity to go to the WIFL conference, which is Women in Federal Law Enforcement. And now that was the first time that I had attended a conference like that, but I was impressed. I was both impressed and surprised because throughout the conference, many of the speakers talked about mental health and resilience. And so I was quite encouraged to see that being talked about openly. It was the first time in my career that I could remember being somewhere in a training, with other agencies where there was open communication about vicarious trauma and moral injury. And so hopefully it's changing.
Yeah. So when you said when you were started having this experience with, it's called ayahuasca,
Mm-hmm.
or ayahuasca.
Ayahuasca. Yeah.
You realize that there's other things in your life that you weren't dealing with. What was that process like, and what was that moment like when you realized that, oh, I need to work on this?
I found it surprising because I think like so many of us in the field, like you're tough, right? I mean, I'm good. I don't need anything. I don't need, counseling or whatever. I sought it out for that very specific reason of processing grief, and ended up finding, so many of these other layers of myself that I had just, like one example, I had a ceremony that was very much about joy and sorrow, and understanding that those two things have to be balanced in life, and that I had filled myself up with sorrow, and I processed just one thing after another of events that had happened in my career. Like, if, for example, Emil, the woman that was killed, and other things that had happened, cases, victims, tragic things that had come across my desk, and had just led me to just kind of shut out joy. And by the end of that ceremony, I was just filled with joy, and I was laughing, and everyone else that was there in the ceremony, it was contagious. Laughter is contagious. Sure. Everyone else started laughing, and it just was like I was able to just kind of lay down all of that sorrow and leave it in the past where it belongs.
So does it last?
Yeah.
And why? And why if it does, why?
It does last, but it takes work, right? It's not a quick fix. It's not a one and done. You have these, at least this is how I have experienced it. Mm-hmm. I will realize something in a ceremony like that. And at the time it's like, how did I not see that? Like, I should have been able to connect those dots. I should have been able to figure this out, without having to go through all this. Ayahuasca is not an easy thing to do. Some of these ceremonies that are very painful. And at the end of it, but you have these realizations that are just so worth it, because you have an understanding of why you are the way you are, like what exactly happened to make you this way. And it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I didn't connect those dots, without having to go through all of this. But if you just leave it right there, then you can get sucked back into old routines and habits and in many ways we're like records, and the record just keeps going unless something stops it. And I think that's what, at least for me, I think that's what ayahuasca allowed me to do, was pause that track so that the next time I started to feel or react in the same way, it allowed me the space to correct. Like, no. I'm about to react that way because of this, and this. And no, I don't want to do that anymore. Now I'm going to proceed in this other way, or in a different way, if that makes sense.
I think there's a lot of mystery and questioning behind ayahuasca and what it is and how it works. So what is it?
It's an Amazonian drink. It is made from 2 plants, one of which is a vine. The 2 plants are mixed together, I guess, boiled. I think they're cooked, I believe. And it's given to you in a liquid form. It's a kind of a liquid, thick, not particularly good tasting liquid.
Kind of like a milkshake type of thing.
Probably about that consistency, but it doesn't taste that good.
You're not going to say, I want more of that.
Yeah. It's usually used in religious context.
Okay.
I did it. I joined an ayahuasca church, Centro Espiritualista Luz de Vegetal, which is a church in Florida. And so my ceremonies that I've done have all been with that church in a temple there in the woods. And about 30-40 minutes after you drink it, you start to experience, usually you experience discomfort, like physical discomfort, and then that's followed by your mind kind of going on a journey. But the interesting thing about ayahuasca is that you really have to surrender to it. You have to be willing to let it go into the depths of your mind and unpack things and pull them up and put them in your face, and with no sugarcoating, say, here, this is an issue. You need to deal with this. You need to take responsibility for this. And the first time, interestingly enough, the first time that I drank ayahuasca, I drank 5 cups and I had no reaction to it whatsoever. And at the end of that ceremony, I was disappointed. I also just felt like unworthy. And I went to the facilitator of the ceremony and I said, I don't understand what happened. And he said to me, do you smoke a lot of marijuana? And I said, I've never smoked marijuana. Cause I guess if you smoke a lot of marijuana, it can, I don't know, it can have a reaction or cause it not to be effective. I said, no, I've never smoked marijuana. He said, well, what do you do for work? Or I said, I just retired from law enforcement. And he just kind of got this look like, yep. Is that a lot of, and that this church works with veterans as well. They have ceremonies that they do just for veterans. And he said, this is not uncommon with first responders, veterans, people in intelligence. You all spend so much time building these walls and compartmentalizing and learning how not to show your emotions, and and you think you're going to come into this environment and just be completely vulnerable in front of a group of strangers. And meanwhile, your ego is like, no, I don't think so. That's not going to work. So I really had to go back to go back and think about what it was that I wanted out of this experience and why I hadn't been able to connect, and kind of sit with that for a couple of months. And I spent a lot of time just meditating and journaling and trying to get my mind to a place where I felt like I could be vulnerable in front of people and I went back that was a one night retreat that I went to the first time. And when I went back, I went for 3 nights. I thought, well, maybe if I do 3 consecutive ceremonies, maybe I'll get some results. So I went back for a 3-day retreat, and yeah, I was cracked open.
Mm-hmm. And so that then enabled you to kind of really do the work, right? To get to that better spot of where you want to be. Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that difficult? Once that opened up that door and that window to, okay, I need to work on this. How hard was that?
Yeah, ayahuasca is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. It's not just the physical discomfort, but this is very uncomfortable. There were at least one occasion where I thought I was going to die. If you research psychedelics at all, you hear people talk about ego death, and that's a real thing. Like, I mean, I had a ceremony where I thought I was dying, and finally I was just like, okay. And that was a big chunk of my ego. It was like the first ceremony where I had a connection. It was like a battle was happening between my ego and the ayahuasca. It was like very, very intense. Because it's very hard to let go. It's very hard to surrender. But it's necessary in order to work through all that baggage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that was a few years ago, I'm assuming. And so how has that journey progressed for you since then?
Yeah, it's been over the last 2 years. And I don't know that I would recommend this for everyone, but I did quite a few ceremonies in a relatively short period of time. And I kept feeling as the layers started to peel, I wanted to know how many layers there were, and were there still things that I needed to uncover? Were there still things, like, was I ever going to get to a point where there was no new trauma to surface in a ceremony? And I did eventually get to a point where you always have things to work on. Like that, I'm not suggesting that there's no room for improvement. There will always be things, that we need to deal with. That's just part of being human. But I did eventually get to a point where I felt like there weren't going to be any surprises. And so now I'm in a good place. I mean, I'm very happy. I love what I'm doing. I've shifted my focus to trying to help others in the first responder community. I've written a book about this journey that's going to be out next month, and it's let's just say there are things in the book that I had not told anyone in my life, or maybe just, a couple of people. And now I'm about to put it out there for the whole world to read. Every mistake I ever made and everything I was ever embarrassed about is about to be out there.
What gives you the guts to do that kind of thing, to just expose all that, and then why?
Because I think, or I hope that in doing that, others will read it and be able to take a step towards healing. Because we all carry these things. We all struggle to be vulnerable. We all struggle to ask for help. And the idea for the book came to me in a ceremony, and it was like it wrote itself. It was a wild experience. I wrote this book in 12 days.
Wow. I've been working on a book for a year or so.
Yeah, it came to me like I mean, I know it probably sounds crazy, but it was like it came to me like a download. It just now I spent several months working on it and
Sure.
fleshing it out and tweaking it and ultimately had an editor go through and fine tune it, but it just poured out of me, and I don't know. It's not. It's. I mean, I still have reservations. It's not out there yet, and I'm still like, oh my god, am I really?
It's like you're waiting on the send button. Do I hit it or not?
I might have to have someone else hit submit when it comes down to it. But I mean, I've had a few of my colleagues read it, and they've been very supportive. So I'm hopeful that it'll be well received in the community, and at the end of the day, I just hope that it helps people. Maybe they can see themselves in the story, and if nothing else, understand that it's okay to need to heal. It's, it's what makes us human. Like, we go into this profession to be of service to our communities, and that service takes a toll. And so often I think we don't even realize that that's happening because it happens so slowly over such a period of time. It was a surprise for me to realize that it had changed me so much. And it's very liberating and peaceful to be able to let that go. And I want that for others who have served.
And you told me the other day when we talked that you're working on something, you're about to go on a journey that will continue to bring healing for you and then to bring awareness to others.
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I'm going to release the book telling the world all of my deepest, darkest secrets, and then I'm going to unplug for 6 weeks and walk 700.
I don't want to see any comments or emails or.
Right. I'm going to walk the Camino de Santiago, 780 kilometers from the border of France across Spain. It's, interestingly enough, it's a pilgrimage that I wanted to take when I retired, but was not able to because I had surgery on my foot. And so I ended up on this other journey that I never expected with ayahuasca. And now, 2 years to the date of my retirement, I'm going to show up in St. John Pied de Port, which is the starting point for the French route of the Camino. And I'll start walking on April 26th. I'm going to walk it with my dog, Nona, who is, so the French route starts in the Pyrenees Mountains, and Nona is half Pyrenees, half coonhound. And it just, I had the idea one day that wouldn't it be kind of neat to take her to her ancestral roots in the Pyrenees and walk it with her. This dog loves to walk, and you cannot wear her out. We'll see if that remains true. But so
how many days does that take?
It's going to take about 6 weeks.
Okay.
I think. Yeah, I've budgeted. I'm planning to do it fairly slow. I've built in a couple of down days. And I want to do it as an awareness walk for mental health and trauma recovery in the first responder community. So, yeah.
Yeah, very cool. I know you mentioned to me something about maybe putting some patches on the dog's harness, things like that. What's that about?
Yeah, I had a website built. It's knownasway.com. And on the website, there's a place where people can go and submit names or messages of anyone that's lost the battle to PTSD. And any of those messages that we receive, we will carry with us on our journey. And there's also a spot where you can submit a patch, a department patch for that person's department. And any patches we receive will sew onto our backpacks, and we'll carry those with us as a way to honor those individuals and start conversations. And
So you're starting April 26th. What date are you planning on arriving at the destination?
I am planning to reach Santiago de Compostela the first week of June. Depending how it goes, I'm going to be wore out, I'm sure, more so than Nona. But if I can get to Santiago de Compostela with enough of a buffer, I do have a hard end date of the 9th, I think. If I can get there early enough, I'd like to walk all the way to the sea at Finisterre. And then if we have, those messages and things, I thought there's a tradition on the Camino of burning things at the very end, like walking all the way to the sea and burning things in an act of release. And so if we have some messages to carry with us, I thought that might be something that we could do if we go all the way to the end and do a little ceremony of release. But it's good. I think it's going to depend on how it goes.
Sure. I think for those, and I've had some friends that have walked that, and I'm not sure the exact route. I think my friends that did it last summer, they started in Portugal, I believe, and did.
Yeah.
But it's a really spiritual experience. Is that something that you aspire to have that kind of, engagement?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they say it's one of those things like you just kind of feel like, called to do it. And I've wanted to walk it for a number of years. Just have never been able to shake that desire. So I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a good experience. And
yeah. So what would you say to those first responders who are listening, who are maybe in their own, maybe they don't even realize they're in their own mess? What would you say to them?
Yeah. I think that is more common than we realize, that when you spend your life in the service of others and always watching out for others, it's so easy to forget that we need to also watch out for ourselves. And I think the best way to do that, to start that journey, is just to have moments where you can sit with yourself and listen to your body, listen to, try to quiet the chaos that's so often in our heads, Monday night quarterbacking and all the things that we think about, and find time to just kind of sit in silence and listen to yourself and your body, and recognize that everybody needs to heal. Mm-hmm. Not just first responders. Everyone that's walking the planet has something that they need to heal from, right? And as first responders, we just carry more of it. So recognizing that happens and that's okay is the first step, and then figuring out what to do about it and how to process those things that we carry with us. There are many, many paths to healing. I found my way to one that worked for me. It wouldn't work for everybody. But I think being able to listen to our intuition, to kind of fine tune that. And I think that starts with being able to kind of sit with yourself in silence.
And I know from the first responders that I've engaged with over the past 6-7 years that sitting in silence is not easy.
Right. Right. But the fact that it's not easy means there's healing that needs to happen.
Right. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. So, and I love that you said that, there are many paths to healing. And I know people that have, done other things like EMDR and TRP, trauma resiliency protocol, and other things that have taken people to a place of healing. And I think that, this is something, and, while I don't necessarily advocate one or the other, I think, you have to choose your own path and find what works
Right.
in your space. And so you found that ayahuasca worked for you, and you're in a better place because of it. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you found that healing.
Thank you.
And I'm really jealous of you walking the Camino, because that's something that I've been pondering on. I've had several friends that have done it, and my wife and I really hope to do it sometime in the future. And we love that part of the world. We love Portugal and the whole European scene.
Yeah.
And so spending some time like that, seeing it slow, I think is really a beneficial thing.
Yeah.
So I'm jealous, and I'll be following along as you go.
Yeah, please do. Nona has an Instagram account as well.
Okay.
Nona's Way. It's like Nona_way_, and I'll be posting updates on that.
Okay. Well, we'll be sure to put all those links in the show notes so people can
Okay.
access that and follow along and connect. So if anyone wants to connect with you, is that the best way to go? Just to go to the website and
Yeah, so I have two websites, klsadler.com for the book, but there's also email contact on there, and then knownisway.com for the Camino walk, and either of those will get you to me.
Okay, awesome. Well, Kemmi, thank you for being on the program. I'm so glad we connected, and I wish you the very best. And we'll get this out to the world and let people hear your story. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Kemmi, thanks so much for sharing your story. Thanks for being vulnerable and talking about some things that are maybe difficult to talk about. And for those of you listening, if you have any curiosity about ayahuasca, I just encourage you to Google it and to search it. And, everyone is built different. Everyone has experienced life in a different way and has experienced healing in a different way. And this was a path that she took. And so that's why I thought it was important to have it on the program. And so please let me know in the comments what you think, what your thoughts are on this. And let's have a further conversation about things that may be out of the ordinary that bring healing and wholeness for someone. And in Kemmi's case, it was an experience with ayahuasca. So that's it for today. That's it for the podcast. Be sure to tune in next time and for another compelling conversation right here on the First Responder Wellness Podcast. My name is Conrad Weaver. Thanks for joining us today. And as always, please remember that you are not alone. And if you need someone to talk to and don't know where else you can turn, you can dial 988 for help. And we have a list of other resources and phone numbers on our website at firstresponderwellness.co/resources. firstresponderwellness.co/resources. Check it out, and be sure to take care of yourself. Go out and have a great day. I'll see you next time.